We're so glad that you joined us today. This is Rose Hennessy. I'm here with Kelly Molicki, and we're here to talk about some prevention stuff going on. For those of you who are new to webinars, a few logistics. You've got a chat option that you're welcome to type in. You have a hand button right here that you can raise to be unmuted, and we encourage you to ask questions. Peter Fiala, we're lucky to have him with us here, and he's going to be dealing with any tech issues. Kelly and I can answer content questions, and we also have Ginger Francis helping with some audio, and Dominic Holt here as well at WCASA. So these are the things we're hoping that by 11:30 you'll have a little bit more awareness of things that are happening on the state level for prevention, some things you can do in your own community, and some resources that you can use for prevention and training. So we're going to jump right in and start with the awareness and prevention activities happening on the state level. And I'm going to hand it over to Kelly.
Great, thanks Rose. Good morning everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. So we just wanted to start off in giving sort of a background and framework for some of the work that we've been doing at the state level. And we often get a lot of questions and TA requests and things, really looking for that awesome curricula, that great program that's going to help us prevent sexual violence in our communities. And we aren't the only organization that gets that. We have partners that are doing child sexual abuse prevention and child abuse prevention and other education folks who are getting similar questions. And so we are a part of some statewide groups that have been kind of grappling with this, both from a statewide level as well as from a policy level. And we all came together to try to answer this question not only for WCASA and our partners, but also for other folks who are doing child sexual abuse work as well. And so we are working with folks at Children's Trust Fund, Department of Public Instruction, child abuse, as I said, the child abuse prevention folks. So we really have a great group of folks together to help us really define what we think is going to have a real impact in preventing sexual abuse. So we started with the question, what would it take for every child to reach adulthood without becoming a victim or perpetrator of sexual assault? And so that's a really tough question. And we sort of spent some meetings talking about it. We had a lot of different ideas. We pulled together a lot of different research, and we really started talking about what we thought were core concepts for sexual abuse prevention. And we're really looking at these first three levels, the individual, relationship, and community level. If folks are familiar with this, this is the social ecological model. You've maybe seen us use it in the past. You've maybe seen it on our website. It's also used in a lot of different prevention fields as well. But what we want to do is, we know that to affect real change, we need to be impacting at all four of these levels. And so we're going to start by talking about these first three levels, which are addressed through our core concepts. And Rose and I are going to kind of go back and forth on these concepts as we go through them. So right now you'll see sort of all of them on your screen, and then we're going to talk about each of them individually. So we will start with sexual health and development, and this really is that early concept of teaching children anatomically correct terms for their body parts, teaching age and developmentally appropriate sexual development, as well as as kids are getting older, teaching them evidence-based sexual health, and supporting access to comprehensive reproductive health services and information. And this is really that healthy sexuality stuff that we've been talking about, that we've seen come out at the national level, and this is what we think is a really important component of our core concepts. I'm going to turn it over to Rose to talk about some of the research.
Thanks, Kelly. So one thing, just to go back real quickly, when we were coming up with these core concepts, they came out of actually four sort of places total. So one, we had a partner who on the state level who's doing a lit review on child sexual abuse prevention programs and what makes them more effective in meeting outcomes. And so we took that, but we also knew that that is limited in many ways because most child sexual abuse prevention programming with children is really focused on secondary prevention and doing that really well. So we didn't want to lose that because that's important, but we're also wondering what does adding some primary components and maybe even some tertiary prevention components look like. Simultaneously working on a literature review to look at determinants of sexual aggression. So for and the research is really focused around men, but most perpetrators of sexual aggression are men. So in adulthood, looking at men and saying, like, what is it about men that perpetrate sexual violence and don't, and what's happening in their lifespan, and what could we address in terms of a prevention standpoint? So we pulled information from there. Then we had our wonderful practice-based experience of practitioners and saying this is what we're doing, this is what seems to be effective from a practice standpoint, and then additional research as we were going through where we're like, is there information to say that responding and identifying to trauma is likely to prevent someone to perpetrate later in life? Let's go to the literature and let's see what we can find out. So that's kind of where those things came from. And you'll see up on your screen now that there's a lot of text that's not very friendly for a webinar format. So when you get the notes and slides from this presentation, you're going to see this text in the notes below each PowerPoint slide for each core concept. And you can see it also has the citations included, but since that's not very user-friendly, I put it in more of a bulleted format to talk about for each core concept. So Kelly already mentioned healthy sexuality is a protective factor, and we're taking that from our national partners at the National Sexual Violence Resource Center who have been documenting that and looking at that and pulling together some of that research. There's also some interesting initial research happening where they're looking at high school students and seeing, and they found that students who have more specific knowledge on sexuality, like they can identify, stages of reproduction or anatomy, whatever those specific questions are, also are less likely to endorse rape myths, or they have decreased rape supportive beliefs. And it's kind of, again, we always know that correlation does not equal causation, so just because there's a link between that doesn't mean that, if everyone can label their body parts, they're not going to rape. But it's a starting place to say that there's some kind of relationship happening here, and we want to look at that as a protective factor. So we're going to move on to the second one. All right, the next one is gender socialization, and this is an area where we hear from folks a lot about, that we know educators out in communities are doing some of this work, and so we thought this was really important, not just because of the research that Rose is going to discuss in a minute, but also because it was reflective of the work that was going on. So again, this is your work that is challenging gender-based stereotypes. It is supporting skills and interest outside gender expectations, as well as discussing concepts of masculinity and entitlement, and supporting non-binary gender exploration. And what I think is exciting about this one is this one saw some changes after we started sharing it with some partners to get some reflection, to get some feedback, and that piece around entitlement was initially not in there, for example, and after bringing it to a regional meeting, Rose got some feedback and brought it back, and we decided that was really important in relation to masculinity as well as in relation to gender socialization. So again, we know that folks are already doing a lot of work in this area in sort of challenging gender stereotypes and exploring gender exploration beyond just a male-female binary framework. So I'm going to, again, pass it over to Rose. And this is probably a risk factor concept that folks are already really familiar with. Some of the things that stood out are that, if you are to look at what some of the core determinants of perpetration are. Consistently across literature, juvenile delinquency is one of them, and another one is this concept of hostile masculinity. And I was talking about that with folks, and they're like, well, what does hostile masculinity really mean? How are people measuring that? So I wanted to give you an idea on this webinar. Without being too technical or spending too much time looking at other resources, but hostile masculinity is kind of a composite construct where they look at attitudes supporting aggression towards women, using different scales. You can see the rape myth acceptance scale. Folks might be familiar with that, acceptance for interpersonal violence. And these are all Likert scales where it'll have an item like, I enjoy the feeling of having someone in my grasp, or I enjoy the conquest in terms of sexual dominance, and then they'll rate how much they agree or disagree with that. And then hostility towards women is one of the larger contributing factors. So constructs like, I feel upset even by slight criticism by a woman, and I rarely become suspicious with women who are more friendly than expected. And then when you combine those three items together, it gives a hostile masculinity score. Some other things that are kind of looking at that, you can see this hostile sexism, ambivalent sexism scale, a number of questions. And I thought it was interesting because we didn't look at these before we talked about the non-binary questions, but even the first question, a man is not truly complete as a person unless he has the love of a woman, also reinforcing some of those homophobic or other isms. So those are just some ways that people are measuring that construct. I thought folks might be interested. Another thing that came out looking in research is that hostility itself is not associated with sexual aggression. And we don't deal with this as much with rape, but I feel like a lot with domestic violence, we see this idea that like people perpetrate violence just because they're angry. Like that's why this is happening. And they found that anger itself is not associated with sexual aggression, but rather it's that hostile masculinity, which really goes back to the idea that there's something happening with gender and gender socialization intermixed with that anger and hostility that's causing perpetration. And then last but not least, if we talk about what it means to intervene with gender socialization, we know that at really young ages, there's a bunch of research with like 2 to 4-year-old boys and girls that are looking at gender socialization. In just one of these studies, they put a bunch of toys in front of young kids, and they asked them to say which ones are toys for girls and which ones are toys for boys. And as you can imagine, even at age 2 or 3, the kids could identify it. But even more interesting is they could predict that their parents would disapprove for boys if they played with girl toys. So there seems to be some opportunity to intervene, not just with young kids, but also with parents of young kids.
All right, the next one again is a place where, we know that sexual assault service providers are experts in their community and experts in the field on providing information about sexual abuse. And while Rose referred to this earlier more as a secondary prevention and information and resources sort of piece, we thought it was really important when we were doing a comprehensive 10-concept framework for sexual abuse prevention. So providing information about sexual abuse that talks about what it is, that provides information about perpetrators and victims, including information about grooming and different things like that. It emphasizes that abuse is never the fault of the victim, and it dispels common misperceptions about sexual abuse. And again, we know I don't need to talk too long about these things. Rose can talk a little bit more, but we know that this is a lot of the work. This is a lot of the work that we do at WCASA. We know this is a lot of the work that you are all doing, and so this is something that sexual assault service providers and coalitions have been doing for a really long time. And so I'll just cover this one real quickly so we don't have to keep kind of passing between Rose and I. The important pieces and the rationale behind this one is of course we know in every audience that there are survivors present, and we want to acknowledge that every time time we're talking about sexual abuse, giving people sort of permission to take care of themselves, which sounds weird, but we want to make sure that we say that. We also know that there is a general lack of awareness about what sexual abuse is, and for those of you doing community education, that is true in every audience that you go into. And you think, I know Rose and I have been doing some new audiences lately, and we try to do some polling at the beginning just to kind of see, because we really don't know what the awareness is going to be. And recently we asked folks, like, how many of you are working with people who have been victims of teens that have been victims of sexual abuse, and what is your knowledge? And they ranked their knowledge pretty high. And then later in the presentation I referenced Steubenville, the sexual assault case in Steubenville. For those of us that do sexual assault work, that was like all over the place. Like, we knew the details, and there were so few people in the room that had even heard of the case. And so we know that there is some lack of awareness about sexual abuse, as well as specifically related to perpetrators and victims. We also know that rape myths are still really prevalent in our communities, and we know that rape myth acceptance is a risk factor for perpetration. Rose referred to the rape myth acceptance scale previously, so that is an important piece. And we also have a big focus, particularly with our partners, around the idea that it's an adult responsibility to keep children safe. And a lot of our focus previously on child sexual abuse prevention was sort of focused on what children needed to do to keep themselves safe. And we are really trying to look more at what the role of adults are in this process. All right, the next one here is intersections of oppression. Again, something that I think we are trying to do here in terms of looking at the intersections of what we often refer to as isms, so race, ethnicity, class, orientation, gender, ability, and really looking at how those intersections impact sexual violence. And we want to promote respect and understanding for all cultures and identities, as well as explore concepts of self-identity and privilege. And that's sometimes a piece that gets lost when we talk about oppression, is that we forget to sort of talk about ourselves and talk about our privilege. And we also want to provide instruction on cultural competency and inclusivity in terms of all of the programming that we are doing, as well as getting participants to sort of self-reflect and understand the different identities and intersections of all of these things.
And from a research standpoint, we know that certain communities that are at those intersections of oppression are at higher risk of sexual violence. And I didn't pull up the statistics for each community, but we could if we wanted to, and we could go through Native communities, we could go through folks who have disabilities, for communities that are deaf, for all different race ethnicities, for different immigration and nationality statuses, for occupation. We could go through a lot of those different things, but we do know that there's something happening that's putting certain communities at higher risk for sexual violence. And if we don't address this and we don't really look at this as an important core concept, not just by itself, but really within the intersection of all of the other ones as well, we're only going to prevent sexual assault for certain communities. And that's not the world we want to live in. We want to live in a world where all people live free from sexual violence. And then some other interesting stuff, that they were polling college students and asking them to answer all of these scales. So kind of like the rape myth acceptance scale, but also things about racism and homophobia and ageism, classism, religious intolerance. And they found, probably not unsurprisingly to us as an audience, that those who ranked higher on all of those things, so students who are more likely to be ageist and classist and homophobic, were also more likely to endorse rape myths. And so we're seeing that, again, there's some kind of correlation going on between oppression and sexual violence, and so we want to really be hitting those intersections, violent language, addressing those intersections so that we can be really inclusive in our prevention work.
Safety and risk reduction is, again, another area where sexual assault prevention has sort of lived for many years, and this was an area we weren't really sure. Like, we kind of went back and forth about whether we wanted to include this, and we had some really in-depth conversations about that, and trying to kind of grapple with this, because in a lot of ways we know that safety and risk reduction can come across oftentimes as victim blaming, as well as we refer to it a lot here as kind of that rape deflection. So I'm going to maybe try to do something myself that's going to make me less likely to be victimized or to stop some sort of victimization, but that doesn't really prevent that incident, because we're just deflecting it, and that perpetrator is going to go find another victim. And so we kind of struggled with this one a little bit, but we ultimately landed in a place where, again, we know that this is a core part of sexual assault work, and we can do it. We believe we can do it in a way that isn't victim blaming. We know that providing general safety recommendations is oftentimes a really good place to start, particularly when we're trying to normalize some sexual abuse prevention. If we can talk about it in similar ways as we talk about fire safety and tornado drills and things like that, that we know that from a public health standpoint, sometimes when you can normalize those conversations and make them a part of our, and maybe not our daily practice, but our regular practice within schools and workplaces and things like that, that you may create an environment that's safer, because people are more willing to talk about it and more willing to understand the issue. We also know that it's important to talk to people about safe and unsafe situations, and especially with young kids, helping them identify trusted adults, as well as developing support networks, because we know that is a protective factor for sexual abuse, as well as teaching self-protective strategies and skills. And the place I often land in this one, when I sort of grapple between my prevention brain and my parenting brain, is that I really believe in primary prevention, and I really believe that that's where our energy needs to be focused. At the same time, I have had these conversations with my teenage daughter, and I've had them in a way that hopefully is setting up a framework that, you can do all of these things, and, recognize safe and unsafe situations. You can have support networks, you can have good self-protective strategies and skills, and something bad can still happen, but also that it is empowering, we know from survivors that it's empowering to learn these skills and to feel like there are some situations where you can make decisions that'll help contribute to your safety. And so that's sort of where we landed in keeping this as one of our 10 concepts.
And from a very upstream perpetration prevention lens as well, we know that one of the best things for youth development and outcomes is having a trusted adult that they can go to and a support network. So although I have not seen research yet that says that youth who have that and feel more comfortable talking with adults are less likely to perpetrate sexual aggression, I wouldn't be surprised by that finding. A lot of the research for this that we looked at comes from one study that was pretty well done from a research standpoint, where they picked up phones and they called adults all throughout the U.S. and they asked them, were you ever exposed to a prevention program, sexual abuse prevention program as a child? And for those who said yes, 88% of the programs included information to tell an adult. So if we pretended that they asked 100 adults, we'll say 88 of them said that information was included. 57% said that their programming discussed the continuum of touch, so not just good and bad touch, but touch on a continuum. And 78% taught warning signs of dangerous situations, which is really sort of the safety and risk reduction. A lot of this is things that we're talking about up here. And so then moving forward, when they asked what happened after that programming, and again, this is all retrospective, we can think of ourselves as adults, how much do we really remember from a prevention program that we experienced as kids and what happened afterwards? So there is some bias in that. But 37% of the adults who were exposed as children said that they could think of a time that they decided to tell an adult something because of what they learned in the program. So we don't know whether they were disclosing sexual abuse, but they were having more conversations, and they were sharing and building the support networks with adults, and 45% of them could think of a time that they used program information to help themselves or a friend. And we'll talk about bystander intervention later as a concept, but some good research that is showing that it does not appear to be harmful, if anything, to teach that, and that maybe there is some good outcomes happening.
All right, cruising on through, talking about boundaries and consent, and this one is similar to, has some similarities to the last one, and Rose did talk about the teaching about touching on a continuum, not good or bad, and I think that's the, where we've seen some of the programming go, especially working with young children. We used to call it good touch, bad touch, and hopefully we don't call it that anymore, because we know that that good and bad is sometimes really confusing for children, particularly children who are being sexually abused. In addition to that, some empowerment skills and practicing how to say no, how to sort of find your voice and reject unwanted advances, teaching information about setting and respecting boundaries. So it's not just about like you setting your boundaries, it's also talking about how to respect other people's boundaries, which is really important, particularly with young people. I used to do this work in both elementary and middle school, and it was something that was a little more concrete for them. So it was something that they could understand, that they could, even at pretty young ages, they could understand boundaries and how to set those for yourself, as well as how to respect those of your friends. And then as we get older, discussing concepts of consent. And the thing that we've been seeing most recently, only in about the last year or so, I would say, is really talking about affirmative consent. And for a long time in sexual assault work, we would say things like, we would say the phrase, and we'd see it on posters that said no means no. And we're seeing a swing in that, particularly led by work on college campuses, where we're seeing a switch to a more affirmative consent position, where we're talking more about that yes means yes, and an absence of yes is a no. And so we've seen laws being passed in states, we've seen policies being passed on college campuses, sort of relating to this affirmative consent relating to this concept. And so we think that all of these things are again important in terms of sexual abuse prevention, as well as we know that this is an area of work that our sexual assault service providers are doing a lot of work in this area at multiple levels of ages with children up through college.
And you saw the previous study about teaching touch on a continuum from that boundaries area, and we also are just starting to look at the research for this core concept, but really trying to believe and enforce that consent can be introduced at young ages related to non-sexual behavior, hoping that then that will proceed forward. So the idea of like being able to consent with who you hug and who you say goodbye to, and how you say goodbye to them, and what it means to provide options and autonomy, which takes us into our next core concept.
We're almost through the 10. I don't know if this is really really tedious for people, but we want to get through all of them and sort of provide us. Oh, yep. Hold on. Oh, 4 left. Okay. All right. So body empowerment and body ownership is what Rose was sort of alluding to in terms of really talking about what it means to have ownership over your body, and distinguishing between public and private body parts, which I think folks have been doing a lot. I think the differences around that decision making, particularly with young people. And again, as a parent, I remember this concept and really trying to make this an important part of my parenting with my daughter, and it caused some controversy even within my own family, because I would have my parents sort of questioning my parenting decisions and saying, you know, like, I don't like the way she speaks to you sometimes. And I would say that if I expect her to challenge other people and to speak up for herself and be empowered, I have to expect that she's going to also exhibit those skills that she's learning with me. So she's going to challenge me, she's going to challenge her dad, and that's really a safe place for her to learn those skills and practice those skills. And so really talking about that autonomy piece is not only important in talking with that about children, but really talking about it with parents. I can imagine if we were to go into a school and really empower students that they have complete autonomy and decision making over their body, they may not, that may not be reflected in their home, and it may cause some confusion, as well as it may cause some frustration with parents. So this is something we need to be looking at in that social ecological model. We need to do this at multiple levels. And again, that we want to be encouraging and really practicing those assertiveness skills, particularly related to that autonomy and body ownership piece.
And Kelly talked about that first bullet point, and the second one, which is I think a bit of research that makes me really, really sad, is that we do know that from some perpetrators who have shared the tactics that they use to prey on child victims or adult victims, that they in many cases are seeking out vulnerable children or vulnerable adults. And we hear that with perpetrators saying that, you know, I knew that there was something going on at home with these kids, or I knew that homelessness was an issue, and with adults, like, I knew that this person would allow me to sit closer to them at the bar, and then closer to them, and they weren't moving, and they weren't saying no when I was offering them another drink over and over again. And as awful and horrifying as that is, the empowerment is sort of a nice strengths-based approach in trying to build that with people as their own, not necessarily risk reduction, but empowering people to make those decisions and some assertiveness skills. So again, this is pretty much a victimization prevention core concept.
And then we move on to self-regulation and impulse control. And this is where we see, again, some of our work reflected in terms of teaching communication and problem solving, encouraging nonviolent conflict resolution. I think that there are some programs that are doing some of this work, and sometimes it's maybe been more framed as a domestic violence prevention strategy, but we're also looking at it here as a child sexual abuse prevention strategy, as well as promoting impulse control strategies and providing skills and tools related to self-regulation. And I think this is an area where I was more unfamiliar with, and Rose has really helped me through some of the research to understand these things and understand particularly why they're important for sexual abuse perpetration. And I will have her share some of that.
Yeah, so this was news for me. Like, I did not know this going into looking at the literature, but we found over and over again that impulse control is a documented risk factor for sexual assault perpetration. And there's been some more studies that sort of trying to look at why, you know, this idea that if someone realizes that they're receiving resistance, but they're choosing not to stop, why is that happening? And so, again, I don't know if I know exactly all the pathways and why, other than it's documented over and over in the literature as a risk factor. So it's like, if this is something we want to include it as a core concept, we want to address it, what's a positive way to address impulse control? Like, what's the strengths-based approach to that? We really think that self-regulation might be one of those things. And how do we, and you know, theoretically too, again, I haven't seen this in the literature, but thinking about young kids, like young kids who have impulse control, who are like pulling off their clothes and running around in public and, you know, aren't staying with adults, are in some ways more vulnerable and might be more likely to be targeted for victimization as well. So this might be across victimization and perpetration, but we're putting it in here as a perpetration prevention core concept.
And we've got 2 to go, 2 that I think are going to be pretty familiar to folks in the audience. So this is understanding, identifying, and responding to trauma. And again, when we're talking about primary prevention, people may wonder, well, why are you putting this in here if, you know, responding to trauma means something that's already happened? And again, we thought it was important, particularly in our work around the adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, that we know that people who experience one ACE are more likely to experience 2, and people that experience 2 are more likely, and it goes on and on and on. So we know that the effects of ACEs are compounded, and so that ACE piece is an important part of this, as well as promoting trauma-informed environments and responses, which we know is important not only for survivors but also for prevention, as well as working with adults and professionals and groups to identify resources and strategies in the response to trauma. So we believe that if there is a helpful and good response to any sort of trauma, that person might be more likely to seek out services for other things. And so we want to teach disclosure skills and encourage disclosure, as well as know what to do when that actually happens. And again, for folks that are doing prevention in schools, we hear this all the time, like prevention educators having to deal with disclosures. We know that happens, and we know that we wanted to include something. We didn't want to discount that experience for folks. We deal with it even when we do state-level presentations. We've been doing work with health educators and with other people in the last couple months, and I don't think there's been a presentation that Rose and I have done in the last couple months to those audiences where we haven't had somebody come up and disclose, maybe not necessarily about themselves, but you know, my sister's son was victimized. How can I help her? And so we know that this sort of responding and understanding trauma is really important. Oh, sure. Let's see. Oh, I got it. I'll read it out loud. Do we know how many healthcare providers embrace the ACE study? Wow, that is a tough question. I know there's we don't know, and I'll just be completely frank about that. What I can say is I know there's a lot of work going on around ACEs. I mean, we're a partnering organization. We're definitely not the lead organization in this. I was fortunate about 1.5 years ago to participate in a sort of a train-the-trainer model around ACEs, and there was a really diverse group from all different backgrounds from all across the state. So I know that there are a lot of people trying to get in to talk to healthcare providers and others about screening for ACEs, about what to do when you do screen. So all I can say is I believe there's a lot of great work being done with healthcare providers and others about ACE, but I can't say how they are embracing it. I guess I can speak a little bit that when the information is well received. You know, I don't know in terms of numbers, but I can say that it's typically well supported. And for those of us that have worked in the field, we're like, well, of course, because we've seen that compounded trauma in the people that we've worked with. We've seen people who, you know, are dealing with a bunch of different things when they come through our door as a rape victim. Then we start to find out all of these other things that have happened. Maybe they were also victimized as a child, or they only have one parent in the home, or whatever it is. We've seen all of these things in the folks that we've been working with. So we weren't surprised by ACE. It was just sort of that validation about that. And I think that that's what other providers are feeling when they are hearing this information as well. So thanks for the question. That's a great question.
And I see that there was a follow-up about how we can help promote that ACE study to our healthcare partners. And I would encourage you, maybe we can reach out afterwards, that there are some state-level, there's a state-level work group that is looking at healthcare and ACEs and is doing that work. So if you wanted to be more involved or see what they're doing, we'd be happy to connect you to that. So our last core concept, again, probably something that won't be surprising to folks, is bystander intervention, a really common thing that we're doing, not just from the end of how to help someone in distress or in an unsafe situation, but also from an upstream standpoint in how to address some of the social norms that might be contributing to violence. So when you hear someone calling someone a fag, or putting someone down because of their identity, or making a rape joke, how can you intervene in those instances as well, kind of in this community, individual responsibility lens, but also trying to create a safe environment. And this is some of the best research is happening in intervention of this area, and from a number of studies there is indication to show that bystander intervention can sustain long-term change in not just knowledge and attitudes, but also behaviors for men and women. That's how they identified the folks in the study who have participated in college settings. But we know that a lot of you are doing that younger, and there are some things happening even in elementary school that's more of like, how do you help your friend? And it might not be some of the social norm stuff, but we see this happening in bullying prevention as well, so there's some other partners working on it too. So we said that this is these concepts would address the individual relationship and community level, and just from a practical standpoint, I mean, it's great that we spent 30 minutes waxing at you poetically with research and norms, but we want to talk about some of the next steps and what that's going to look like.
So for those of you on the webinar that know me and have worked with me, you know that I like to put things in boxes and make them look nice. And that's not just for my linear brain. We're also trying to sort of provide this framework in a way that will be most helpful to our partners, broad partners around these issues. So what we've done is we've taken each one of these 10 concepts and we're laying them out in a resource grid similar to what you see on your screen. So in terms of that social ecological model, you'll see that we're not just looking at working with individuals, that we are looking at working with parents and guardians, youth serving organizations, and other folks. So Rose has pulled up one example of what we have started on for the concept of information about sexual abuse. So you'll see the rationale in the top as well as what those concepts are that we just discussed. And then as we go down, you'll see that social ecological model sort of framework on the left side here, so that individual, and then we take that across sort of a lifespan kind of thing. So what does that look like birth to 5? What does that look like at the elementary age? What does that look like in middle school, high school, and college? And then we're going to try and fill this in with all those awesome resources that we know folks out there are using. And so we want to do that again for individuals, for parents and guardians, for youth-serving organizations or other adults, as well as what does that look like at a more system or community level. And so we want to sort of play this out for each of these concepts and fill this in. So that way when we have TA requests or we have folks that are looking for, like, hey, I mean, Rose and I get these all the time, like, I just got, invited to come into a Head Start class, and I'm supposed to talk about boundaries and how do I do that? And we'd be able to go like, hey, let's go to our boundaries grid and pull out some birth to 5 activities, both for the students as well as maybe you could also encourage them to do some work with parents or staff as well. So we're hoping that you all can help us kind of fill in these resources. I'm going to give a little shout out because I know she's on. Helen Kobison is on, and she's been already helping us fill in some of these grids with resources that you're using. So we are eager to hear from you if you have some suggestions of things that you think would be helpful in any of these concepts for any of these age groups. And if you'd like to contribute, please contact Rose or I.
And we know that you've been sitting and listening to us talk for a long time, which sometimes is the best format for a webinar in some ways. But we'd love to take a second. If you could go into the chat, we spit out a lot of information at you with 10 different core concepts. But if you could choose whichever question stands out to you. One thing that you're thinking about after hearing about these core concepts, maybe if you see some limitations or things that are missing, or you see some use in how they might be helpful, if you just want to take a second to put some of those thoughts in the chat, and we'll be happy to send them back out. So we're going to give you a minute to do that, and this is also a really great time to refill your coffee, tea, or water cup if needed. All right, good. So again, we always want to provide some space for feedback, and we know webinars are not always the best to do that. So if you do have thoughts or you do have limitations, like we mentioned in one meeting, someone said, I really feel like we need to address entitlement more specifically, so we tried to include that in one of those concepts. So if you have those thoughts after digesting the information, please feel free to reach out to us. Some things that came up about limitations in a meeting that I recently did was, how do we realistically address all of these things? Can a sexual assault service provider really handle 10 of these? And I think the answer is no. So what does it look like to build partnership? What does it look like to have sufficient dosage? But we also know that the idea of one program or one concept is not going to end sexual violence in our communities. And I think that following those strings is what's leading us to not necessarily seeing decreases in victimization or perpetration. And then we also heard people say from a helpful standpoint that maybe taking these 10 core concepts to align their support groups or their team groups and spending time with one session on each concept might be helpful. I heard someone saying that they were going to go through their curricula and see what might be missing, and then I heard another person say, I will not do all 10 of these things. I don't have capacity to do all 10, but I do 2 or 3 really, really well, and I'm going to reach out strategically to other people in my community that are working on other ones and see how we can partner. So there's some things that we've heard. We did have something come in the chat that says, interesting conversation with Head Start folks who are using the Conscious Discipline program, which includes sessions on assertiveness and self-esteem, not specific to sexual assault, but to those issues that may increase risk for young children. So that's awesome. If you had a link or information on where we can learn more about that program, we'd be happy to send that out to people who registered for the webinar after we finish. Cool. Well, thank you for thoughts. Again, keep them coming as they come up. Moving forward a little bit, we wanted to go back to revisit that question, and if we were in a room and we were all able to look at each other and talk to each other, I would try to say, like, do we really think that addressing these 10 core concepts would reduce victimization and perpetration? And also acknowledging that we do have a 4th level of that social ecological model, and we don't want to forget that. And so simultaneously, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly to say what we're looking at and thinking on that societal level.
Great. All right. So moving into yet another framework. I'm starting to realize that we sort of like these things at a statewide level. So in terms of what we're doing at a statewide level, in terms of that outer circle of the social ecological model, is really framing our social norm work, which is done oftentimes through our social media, through Facebook, Twitter, as well as we've tried to incorporate it into our newsletter, into a lot of different communications that we're doing. And again, in looking at the research and looking at the research that we've compiled for the 10 concepts, as well as other research that's out there related to social norms impacting sexual violence, we sort of landed on these 4. So we've got that unhealthy sexuality or limited concepts of sexuality, which you see reflected in those 10 concepts, as well as objectification and sexualization. That is also, we believe, an important social norm that is enforcing sexual violence. That gender socialization piece that we saw specifically in those concepts, as well as a normalization of violence. So we're going to talk about each of those a little bit and where they came from. So some of the research, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, so we can kind of jump through it quickly, but we just wanted to at least let you know that we're not like just sort of pulling these out of our heads or somewhere else, that these came from some research that's going on, both from the Centers for Disease Control as well as the World Health Organization, that are doing a lot of work related to social norms. And so we did rely on these 3 documents heavily in our sort of selection and looking at each of these things. So systems of oppression, that is sort of that outer ring, and that is what we sort of talked about under our core concepts, that we aren't going to completely address sexual violence issues if we don't also try to address these systems of oppression, that we know that there's historical trauma impacting systematically oppressed groups, that there are oppressive systems and structures that create and maintain inequality in our society, and that is directly contributing to sexual violence. So although that, like this isn't, this might not be the main focus of your work, but understanding how it intertwines is really important, and understanding that racist beliefs do impact behavior, and we're ultimately looking for that behavior change. When we are talking about prevention, it's not enough just to to change knowledge and attitudes. We really want to impact behavior, and we know that this is a really important piece. And we also know that oppression sort of lives in that power and privilege place, and we often talk about sexual violence as an act of power, and so that is a real direct correlation between sexual violence and oppression that we want to make sure we're acknowledging. And we know that the reason we put it around the outside is because we know it sort of lives in all of these places. It's not just related to gender or to sexuality or to objectification. It has impacts in all of these areas. So that's sort of why you see it around the outside ring. So first we'll talk about normalization of violence and power, and some of this is a little repetitive because you'll see some of the same things that you saw in the core concepts, which is deliberate. Like, we want them to be reflective of each other. It would be weird if these were completely different than our 10 concepts. So some ideas under this one you'll see in front of you that we know we live in a violent culture. We see violence in our media all over the place, whether it's TV, movies. Rose sort of checked herself on using violent language. We all do that as well, and so I think this is something we see. It's a really powerful social norm that's really challenging to address in terms of trying to show the health promotion or the positive side of this, and so this is an important social norm that we believe is contributing to sexual violence. Next, we see that gender socialization piece, and the key parts here are those societal norms that both support male superiority and female inferiority, as well as the homophobic and gender-based harassment and those rigid gender roles and expectations. So again, we saw some of this in the core concepts as well, but this is that gender socialization that we know is sort of polarizing as well as marginalizing of groups and contributing to sexual violence, particularly for people in those groups. Objectification and sexualization. Again, this is that male sexual entitlement piece, and Rose talked about some of that in around hostility too in the research, and as well as maintaining female sexual submissiveness. And I think this is a really interesting sort of construct that we have in our society, that that it's promoted for males to be sexually active, and that is held to high regard, and that is the exact opposite for women. And so how does objectification and sexualization impact males and females differently, and how does that play off in their interactions with each other as well as important? As well as this is where we see the exploitation related to pornography, prostitution, trafficking, and we know folks are doing a lot of work, particularly related to human trafficking, and so we wanted this to be reflective of that, as well as sort of that culture of hypersexualization. And when I referred to media representation of violence, we also see significant hypersexualization in those same places: magazines, TV, music, social media, all different places. So this is, again, one of those important concepts. I hand it over to Rose.
And we have these 4 social norms, and although we want to address them all the time from a state level, we're trying to address one each year. So this year we've started looking at normalization of violence, partially due to some of the stuff that's coming up with police brutality and some of the overlaps that we're seeing with accountability and sexual assault. So far it's been like pretty minimal. We've like had a few things come out in our newsletter, on our listserv. We're trying to have a section of resources and news and information and video clips related to that. But an example of how we can be trying to address these social norms, we're going to just show something, and so that you can use these slides and use it if you'd like it. If you were to go to Google image search and you put in children, this is something that will come up, and you'll see like primary colors and kids looking cute and playing and raising their hand and looking at flowers. However, what does it mean from an objectification or maybe even a gender lens when you look at them separately? So what happens when we Google image boys? So we see you know, boys reading, maybe with a soccer ball. I also see kind of a red flag in my head, like, why are there 4 pictures of boys in swim trunks or tight shorts? Like, that's something to maybe be thinking about. We also see a few people in this picture that maybe don't look like boys, but that look like men. And I know you're all sitting there saying, like, please don't show me what happens when you Google image search girls, but this is what comes up. And a lot of us will probably not be surprised to see that, but something that I was somewhat surprised to see is that now, because I did this a year or 2 ago, now if you do this search, it gives you categories on the top, and you probably cannot read them on your screen, but there are different boxes of like the most popular groupings, and if you notice, the 4th one says normal, which I find to be really, really telling about objectification and sexualization, that when we Google image search girls, and in some way these images are better than the ones I saw a year or 2 ago. Most of them still look like they're adult women, but how telling is it that there's a difference between girls that I look at through an image search and normal girls? And so this is an activity that maybe you could, I mean, as you see, we just walked through it and it only took a minute or 2, but to address a social norm in your CCR, when you're doing community prevention work, when you're doing new staff training, to kind of say like, yes, we see that, and yes, we really don't want this to be the case.
That's a great example and a pretty simple and sad activity that you can do with folks. But sometimes those sort of that imagery is important because sometimes when we talk about these things, their eyes sort of gloss over and they're like, oh, here we go. But to give them some concrete examples can really be helpful. So our final one here is the limited concepts of health and sexuality, or that unhealthy sexuality. And here's where we see, again, Rose referred to things that are going on currently, both in our state and around the country. Here we see this in the first one, systems that limit access to reproductive health services and choice, and we see in our own state ongoing attacks related to reproductive health and choice, and so we see that as an important part of this, as well as we see the sexual entitlement and misperceptions about consent, and we talked about consent in our core concepts. Limited age-appropriate scientific-based education on sexuality, and when I talk to folks in local communities doing work, and we start talking about how do you do healthy sexuality work, and how do you do that in communities that are maybe resistant, and this is where we get hung up, because people will say schools aren't going to let me come in and talk about these things, and this is a challenging piece, and I come from rural North Dakota, so I can relate in some ways in terms of how challenging it might be to have these conversations, and I think this is an important area to seek out some other resources, because there are people that are doing this work, whether it's a health teacher or someone from within the school or one of your community partners, whether it is like a patch program or Planned Parenthood or whomever. There are people that are doing sexuality, scientific, science-based, healthy sexuality work with youth, as well as the last one there, lack of support for autonomy and power to make decisions about one's body. And again, we address that also in our core concepts. Just a little kind of shout out before we move on. There is if you're looking like, these kind of look familiar, you will see that if you've looked at the request for proposals that we released that are coming up here at the end of the month, you will see that that is framed sort of in this same way, as well as each of the bullet points you'll see as well in that document. So if you're like, gosh, I feel like I've heard WCASA talk about this before, you have, and we're going to continue to talk about it. And as Rose said, we're sort of taking one concept at a time per year to focus on. So again, if you have resources, if you're doing this work in your communities and you've got some great resources, we've even talked about how we could create some toolkits to do some activities like Rose showed you in terms of like how would you do this in talking to your CCR, or how would you do this with a group of youth, or how could you incorporate this into some of your other training. So we're always looking for resources, and we'd love to put that together for you all, and then be able to share some of that as we move forward. And I think I'm turning it back to Rose here.
Great. So hopefully, again, I know this is a webinar and we love things to be interactive, but in some ways, just making sure that you can hear us and you can get some information is maybe a good use even in just an hour and a half. So we're hoping that already you've heard some things that you're like, oh, maybe I might think about using this, or I could think about partnering with this person. But some other thoughts about our second objective and some insights for things that you can do in your communities. That, one, if you want to share any feedback that you have, I love this, I hate this, I'm curious about this, I want to know more about this, I heard there's a work group happening on the state level, I want to be involved, related to those 10 core concepts, resources that you're using, or those 4 social norms, please feel free to share that with us. We would love to be able to take that in so we can disseminate it back. And like you saw, we're working on those worksheets right now for each core concept, so it's a really good time to. 2, thinking about the partners that you're working with and trying to expand that work, learning more from them, really owning where we're experts, and like that's good that we're experts in those areas, and maybe who we want to partner with from a prevention standpoint. And then again, the idea of like centering curricular or maybe events or Sexual Assault Awareness Month. A lot of times we do an awareness type events. Could they have a theme around a social norm? Or, if you did 4 events in Sexual Assault Awareness Month, 1 on each social norm. The different ways to explore using that framework to kind of center events or curricula. In terms of social norms, another way to get involved is we are in the process of gathering materials, activities, things that can be done in presentation format on the normalization of violence because it's this year. And so this is kind of an open invitation that if you would like to be a part of a feedback committee saying like, I am working with youth of different ages, or I am working in specific communities or population-specific communities, we invite you to reach out to us and to be a part of that. And something we could set up a date and say, what are folks thinking about the things that we've gathered so far? So that's a way to get involved. We talked about mirroring initiatives. Other things that come up, Kelly, that people could do right now? Oh, mirroring those 4 initiatives in your community. So this year, if you also wanted to say, in this county or in this city, we're also going to do a lot of initiatives and norms around the normalization of violence. Because we found that very frequently when we try to address all of them, we get a little lost. And so not that one is more important than the other, but spending some time to really address that well. And it is interesting to think about what it looks like to incorporate something in all of your work. So I even know that we had a policy release that was recently sent out that addressed our core concepts, and some of those and how that's prevention core concept is used to help set the platform for that. Was it a brief? Was it a press release? There we go. Thanks, Dominic.
And one other thing I will share both in some of my conversations with folks as we've been introducing these ideas is I got some great feedback, and I always try to put myself sort of back in that community place of like, how would I have used this in my community, or would it have been helpful? And I think the one area that I've talked to with an individual as well as sort of reflected myself is we often struggle at getting like multiple sessions in schools, and we know that the dosage isn't enough when we're just able to go in 1 or 2 or 3 times, and using these 10 concepts. Okay, I am still going to do my 2 or 3 sessions where my expertise is, but how can we look at these other 7 areas, and can we look again from a strength-based place to see what are you doing around some of these other concepts already in the school? Where are we missing something? So sort of use it as kind of a little analysis of what's going on already in these areas, and see where you have some gaps, but also be able to identify some strengths, and it might open some doors to having conversations with partners about how to sort of expand that prevention work to include all of those concepts. Oh, sure, we got a question here. Oh, it's not the last for me. Let's see. Oh, can you clarify that one? Can you clarify how the 10 core concepts relate to the wheel with the social norms? So again, I think that while they were sort of developed kind of separately, if you lay them out side by side, you will see the same things reflected in those areas. And so when we're talking about the wheel, we're really talking about those bigger, that societal level social norms. So that bigger macro level piece that is contributing to that bigger cult, like if you want to say rape culture or whatever it is. So it's really that outer edge of the social ecological model, whereas the concepts are really trying to get into the more specific things that are that people are doing in communities, the education, the awareness, the skill building, those sort of things. So it's sort of just more framed in terms of that social ecological model and where we are. So they may sound very similar, and that's intentional. And so if there's some confusion, that's completely understandable. Thank you. Thanks for the question, and I hope that helped.
Great, thanks so much. Awesome was feedback, so that's good. So now we're going to kind of shift gears a little bit, but since we've got you on the webinar and you've taken some time, we just want to go and just, literally show you a few resources that aren't necessarily better or worse, but have been coming up and are timely. So if you're already aware of these, that's one thing, and hopefully you'll pick up on one thing that you might consider using. So one, we know folks don't have a lot of money. There are a lot of free materials out there for download. Everything up on the screen is something that you can download and print off and disseminate, with the exception of the Backzone project, which does have a small cost, but it's not exorbitant. So again, not only for just putting these up in your community, but also disseminating them to the systems or schools that you're working in. From a disclosure standpoint, I do like the loveisrespect.org poster because it provides a confidential place where teens can disclose if you are doing prevention and you are a mandated reporter or you have a reporting policy at your agency. The 10 things that you can do to prevent sexual assault, it's kind of hard to read here, but it comes in different colors. And I'll show it to you. Boink, boink. Which one is it? Aha. I don't know. That's always a fun game. Here it is. Okay, so you can see this one's harder to read, but they've got it in different colors. So not only is this poster useful, but I know sometimes when I'm doing presentations and I want to give people an action list, sometimes I blank a little bit. I kind of have like 2 or 3 things that come to mind of like things you can do to prevent sexual assault, but someone came up with 100, so that's kind of fun. And that Backstone project, again, there's a small cost. A poster is $3 for a single one, and they also have brochures. So there's a cost, but it's not like it's the most exorbitant thing. And I like this because I really think that this is a primary prevention campaign. I don't know how well you can see on your screen. We'll try to open it. But there's a picture of a flower, and it says this is a pansy. I like pansies as a flower, by the way. And then this is a boy who's having a bad day. So kind of that nice, like, how do we address some of those social norms, not on the individual relationship level, that are relating to, like, what's going to happen to this boy when he grows up? If he is used to not having power and control, what is he more likely to be exposed to from a victimization or a perpetration standpoint? And if you want to find all of those things, don't Google them. We're sending out the slides. Here are all of the links where you can download them. So, and the ones that I just pointed out were the backbone zone, probably wrote that wrong, poster project, and 100 things you can do to prevent sexual assault. We also wanted to highlight the Shifting Boundaries curricula because earlier this year this came out as a promising practice evidence-based program, not necessarily the curricula, it's for middle school, but specifically the school-wide intervention. And another nice thing is it's really good research. They randomized it with 30 different schools, and each school had 23 to 36 classrooms, so really good sample size that the research was done with, and a pretty diverse group too, third Hispanic, third African American, and the remaining Asian, white, and other. And there's a number of interesting outcomes and how it came to be, but there was some evidence to show that it prevented perpetration and sexual harassment and some teen dating violence outcomes, which is cool. So you can go online, those links are on there, and you can literally see all of the different sessions if you wanted to implement them. There's 6 sessions for both 6th and 7th grade. So that's one thing that, again, we know you're always pulling different stuff, so you might like one of the items they bring up. And we also like the idea that the word boundary doesn't have sex in it and doesn't say sexual assault, which in a perfect world, like, of course we should be talking about sexual assault with all people and all kids at all ages, but we know that sometimes that's a little scary for communities. So if you happen to be operating in one of those communities, these materials might be helpful for you. And it has implementation information. But the activity, one of the activities that's actually structural that was shown to have the evidence in prevention was this mapping activity. And just to walk you through it really quickly, you create a map of the school, or it could be a youth-serving organization where you are, and this is the template that they give. And there's it says exactly how to do the activity and the instructions for the kids, but basically you give them crayons and you ask them to color in green places at the school that they feel are cool spots. So cool meaning that they feel safe, they feel comfortable, it's welcoming, and places that they're not so sure about to color yellow, and places that they don't feel safe, that they're uncomfortable going, to color red. And then the point of that activity is that you as a facilitator, or if someone else in the school is doing it, compiles all of those together to look for themes at the school to identify where are those places where people are feeling safe and comfortable, and how do we replicate what's happening there in other places of the school, and vice versa. So they've also got some nice implications about, you know, things as simple as lighting, or is there bad lighting in certain areas, is there bad, poor parental supervision in some areas, and I'm trying to get into a little bit of age and race and gender, are certain things happening to kids who look a certain way in certain areas, and how do we intervene? And again, that's also nice language to not say like, hey, where do you experience sexual abuse at school? Which might be a little bit more welcoming. So that's an activity that you could do standalone. And then last but not least, I just want to show, I know we send this out on listservs from time to time, but navigating websites isn't always the easiest thing. If you go to WCASA.org, you go to our prevention page, and then best practice, we just recently updated this not too long ago, and this is where you can find a number of programs by content area. Some of the things that I wanted to specifically show you and point out are these additional resources and registries at the end. This curricula guide lists over 46 different prevention curricula by topic, title, target audience by the Washington Coalition. Great place if you're looking for ideas. A lot of those things are free. And then there are some registries here that if you are, especially if you're interested in doing some of that core concept work, if you're like me, you don't necessarily know what best practice looks like for impulse control or self-regulation with young kids, these are nice places where they have compiled some of those outcomes. And thanks to having a campus coordinator. If you go down on prevention and scroll a little bit lower, you'll see campus. And this page was just recently released. If you're doing campus work, if you're doing prevention or coordinating efforts with campuses, you might find some of the resources here helpful as well. Specifically, if you're not working with campuses and you'd like to and you want to have some context before getting into that work, this could be a good site. All right, how are we doing with time? Yeah, please. Okay, so question. You mentioned to teach touching on a continuum. Could you talk a little further about that? So is that something you want to take, or I'm happy to? So historically, the idea of teaching touching to kids has come from good touch, bad touch, and that like if someone touches your private parts, that's a bad touch. And what we've come to realize as adults is like, although that's a really great concrete thing for kids, that there is a continuum, that there's not really necessarily good and bad places, because if someone has a UTI as a little girl, they do need an adult to be able to touch that place in a safe way. So instead of saying that there are things that are good and bad, the continuum is the idea that there are different times and places when things might be appropriate and not appropriate. And because they're young kids, we have to give really tangible examples. So saying like you have an owie or you have an infection and someone has to help you with that could be a good time, but then also stating who is helping you with that and when and under what context. Anything you wanted to share more about that? And if you want to talk more, we can clear that up. Great question. All right, so we're finishing up. Because we do want to promote some kind of a sharing. We shared some resources that have come up for us, or some posters or some items, just to take a second. If there's something that you've been using lately as a resource, either an activity, Helen shared a guide that I put back into the chat. I'd love for you to take a second to put the name of that resource or the idea of that activity, and we'll share it back. So I'm going to give you a minute to think about things that you've been doing that you're like, I love this, everybody should know, and we want to make that happen. Or if you have other questions too, this is a good time to throw that out. And while you're gathering resources or thinking of something helpful, I will put up our last slide with our contact information. Kelly and I had a conversation about how it used to be a really big thing to have like images that like pop up and flash. So I found one for our last slide, and it has a puppy and a kitten on it. And it sparkles. So the idea is that you will emotionally leave loving this webinar, just because, if nothing else, because of the feel good last slide. More importantly, our emails are on there if you want to be involved in providing feedback on normalization of violence materials, if you have resources for core concepts that you want to share, if you have ideas about how you're doing things in the community, feel free to do that. So we've got 5 minutes left. We're going to stay on the line. And feel free to head out if you need to, or to stay on if you've got a question. We're happy to answer that. And I see that we got some feedback that this has been informative and it's good information to share, so we're really, really happy to hear that. We want your time to be well spent and valued. All right, so like I said, we'll stay on for another few minutes, but if you've got to get going, no one hates ending early. I'll turn it over to Kelly to send you off.
I'm just feeling so much better with the sparkly puppies and kittens that there it's sparkling again. So yeah, just I want to reiterate what Rose said and just say thank you so much for your time and your continuous work. We know that prevention can be tough, and we're here to support you in any way that we can, and we really want to include your expertise in the work that we are doing. So please, in addition to reaching out to us for support and resources, please feel free to share your great work and your resources with us as well. And we look forward to hearing from you and hopefully seeing you all soon. So thank you and have a great day.